Hi, my name is Ben.
And my name is Sophie.
We're both communicators at the Edgelands Institute, and we're very excited to introduce you to our new series, Research, Art and Dialogues. How are you today, Sophie?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm really good. Thanks a lot.
We're going to do a deep dive into the city of Medellin in Colombia. We've been learning lots of interesting things about it, and we're excited to share more. But before we do that, we should give our listeners a bit more context.
Yes, good idea. So at the Edgelands Institute, we study how the digitalization of security is changing the urban social contract. So the social contract is a concept that explains the sets of formal and informal rules that we agree on as a society. So for example, citizens pay taxes and government provides services such as security. We are choosing to pop up in different cities around the world to see different perspectives with different security landscapes. What we mean by pop-up is the Edgelands Institute is only active for a short, temporary and intense period.
Our activities include three main blocks: research, arts and dialogues, hence the name of this series. This includes, among others, diagnostic reports, workshops, research sprints, art residencies, roundtables and more. Our first essential step is to really understand the context behind the questions of security we want to study in a city. That's why when we pop up in a new city, the very first thing we do is a background research.
Yes, exactly. And this background research includes several things, such as a literature review, which means we read all the studies and articles that have already been produced on the topic in that city. And then we complete it with a series of interviews with what we call key informants. Those are people that have a direct interest in these topics or they're already working on these questions. These can be security and technology professionals, academics, community organizers, journalists, members of the government, students, and much more.
In the case of Medellin, our team interviewed 30 people. We asked them a set of open-ended questions and we allowed them to elaborate and go in-depth on issues they considered most relevant.
Yeah, so our questions focused on security challenges in the city, crime and its impact on youth, and the role of digital technology within the methods that prevent crime. So those people we interviewed, they were encouraged to speak from their personal and professional experience.
And the documentation on this background research is what we called a diagnostic report, which we will discuss today in the case of the city of Medellin in this first episode. Of course, if you want to find out more, the report is available on our website at edgelands.institute. We'll include a link in the description. Let's dive into it.
Yeah, let's do it.
Medellin is situated in Colombia, and it's the second largest city of the country, which was actually the very first city where Edgelands popped up in 2021.
Yeah, right. Long before both of us joined the Edgelands Institute, actually.
Yes, indeed, which means this was a discovery for both of us. We've been learning a lot by doing this deep dive into the diagnostic reports. Medellin used to be called the world's most dangerous city.
Yeah, actually, from personal experience, I've been to Medellin not so long ago, so I saw a little bit how it is, and it is fascinating to see that now it's actually a pretty touristic place and one of the famous destinations in South America. And from what I read from the report, it's apparently a hub of tech innovation as well now. So there's a lot of progress that have been made. A lot of things have changed since a couple of years in the city. Now the city is at an all-time low crime compared to its recent history. To make a comparison, for example, in 1991, there was an all-time high of 375 deaths per 100,000 people. Maybe that doesn't speak to you, but by comparison, in 2019, the homicide rate was at 24 per 100,000 people. So it went from 375 to 24. So it's a pretty big progress.
Yeah, that's a big difference. And you could understand now why the city is such a good candidate for Edgelands.
So now that you got a little bit more introduction on the Edgelands Institute and the study of a city like Medellin, let's go really into the history of that city and what happened in the past.
During the 80s and the 90s, the city was home to Pablo Escobar's Medellin cartel. It was the largest drug cartel in the world at its peak, and Colombia became the main exporter of cocaine around the world, and still is to this day, actually. That means it was also often at the center of political killings and gang violence, mainly with the Cali cartel, the other main cartel of the country. That was a big source of instability.
Yeah, for sure.
But in 1993, Escobar was killed by the Colombian police, which brought the downfall of a highly organized drug economy along with him. And stats show that after his death and the reduction of the drug cartel's activities, killings also reduced. It happened not only through fighting crime, but also through improving societal issues like transportation, education, housing, etc. There's a striking example of that in the cable car that connects the richer city center to the poor areas of Medellin. Maybe, Ben, you can tell us more about them, actually, because you've been there, right?
Yeah, I went for a short time, but I took that cable car. The level of safety, generally speaking, knowing that you used to be the most dangerous place in the world, it shocked me in a good way when I went there. So that actually worked and I saw it in person.
Yeah, that's really interesting. You wouldn't intuitively think that as a tourist you'd be able to visit such areas.
Yeah, I don't know, it's great.
But yeah, so this cable car is a great example of one of the increased opportunities for people. Now Medellin calmed down a lot and it's seen as one of the greatest examples of an urban success story.
Yes, exactly. And that's a striking example of implementing the right policies and how it can improve really the socio-economic issues. But not everything's perfect though. Actually, crime is still very much present in the city, which is understandable when you see where it comes from. And there are still ongoing conflicts between the government and organized armed groups that seek independence. So the difference is that crime doesn't come like before from large cartels with a lot of violence and a lot of problems, but instead it comes from smaller neighborhood gangs that are called combos in Colombia.
Yes, and one thing I thought was really interesting is that the perpetrators and the victims of insecurity and violence right now are mainly the young people of Medellin on both sides. And this is something important because it means that young people are the most concerned with these security and crime issues. When we say young people, we mean 14 to 28 years old. Obviously, young people are also the people that will be the main actors of the society of tomorrow. So we need to pay attention.
Yes, exactly. And the combos or the gangs, they are active in the poorer part of the city right now, and they are led by young men, basically. So one of the ways they can keep doing what they are doing is that they are being trusted actually in the neighborhood in where they live, and they are being valued somewhat. They are involved in solving community problems. They are being involved in also organizing festivals and providing their own security in those places. So you can see how they almost become their own form of governance, and that really complexify the questions around surveillance, right?
Yeah, for sure. But here it gets really interesting and frankly quite counterintuitive, especially the fact that those gangs are acting like an informal authority. This is a very foreign concept for us. They're an authority alongside the official one, the government.
Yeah, I think definitely weird. And I'm sure that even within those countries where it exists, people are not exactly sure how it works, especially people that don't live in these complicated areas. But to give you a bit more explanation, so those gangs, they govern the day-to-day issues of security, while the state itself still provides something, but is more like general infrastructure services. However, apparently during the COVID-19 pandemic, the state increased its help to the communities. And that's an interesting point to keep in mind with the continuation of the discussion.
Yes, because now we're going to talk about state security, which is the police, and is quite flawed. One fun fact is that historically, the USA financially supported the Colombian police, which became highly militarized, which means it was being able to fight the cartels and the guerrillas in the cities. One result is that the police force is very centralized and active in the core of the city, but not so much on the edges.
Edges, makes you think of the Edgelands Institute. The name is well found.
Yeah, no, an appropriate name. And added to this, the police forces generally lack resources, which leads to a lack of efficiency and therefore a lack of trust in the police and the justice system, including for petty crimes like robbery. Even the police themselves lack trust and they're unhappy with their own institutions.
Yeah, exactly. So now imagine the situation, like low salaries, corruption, lack of career evolution in the police, difficulty inherent to the work, like the violence and all. And you can start to paint a picture, of the problems in the system. But, Reading the reports, it seems there is a general culture of mistrust. And this could be solved actually. And the way to go about this is re-increasing the dialogues between the citizens and the government forces to recreate that trust. And that's one of the Edgelands goals.
This actually reminds me of the work of Magnum in the city of Medellin. For those who don't know, Magnum is a photography agency we've been working with on several art projects in different cities. I won't go too much into details now because we'll explore that in other episodes. But basically, a photographer went there to document surveillance in Medellin. His name is Peter van Achtmael. And he took some really interesting photos where you can grasp the situation of informal surveillance. You see neighbors watching and peering over the streets from their windows and such. So it really gives a feeling that it's an important form of surveillance there. So yeah, I imagine this is part of a certain culture of mistrust.
You should go see them because they're really incredible. When I saw them, I was really in awe watching these pictures.
Yeah, they're really compelling.
And there are many other artworks as well that you can find on the website of Edgelands and find there the work being done in Medellin. So now we have talked about a lot of things, but not yet about specifically digital technology and security tools. Let's get into it.
Yes, Medellin is actually a pioneer in security tech, and it won prizes for this. It includes surveillance cameras as well as emergency line calls. Those technologies have been successful in reducing small crimes. Again, more in the center of the city, but not so much for maybe more serious crimes in the edges of the city, in the outside of the center, such as drug trafficking and extortion.
Yeah, actually, how would you define extortions? Because it wasn't super clear to me at first when I hear the word extortion. I don't know what it means.
Well, for me, extortion is when you're trying to obtain money from someone by blackmailing them or threatening their families.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, no, it makes sense. Now I have a lot of images in my head. Yeah, so this technology targets more the symptoms of the problem rather than the cause. And the cause is very much linked to structural inequalities.
And the report also says that when the government tries to increase interventions in the outer parts of the city, the gangs increase theirs at the same time to keep control of their territory.
You could also guess that surveillance cameras could be extended to the outer part of the city. But the thing is that surveillance cameras in general, they don't actually solve serious crime. They only solve the petty crimes. So that will require a lot of resources to do so. And those resources are lacking in general. We saw how there are many problems, already in the system and the happiness of the police, for example. So, it even comes down to technical limitations like storage of huge quantity of footage, for example. We don't usually think of those things, but they're also challenging.
Yeah, for sure. Where does all this data go? But apparently there's a lot of government narratives praising technological security, even though, as we could observe, it plays a minor role in actual serious crime. It can even create additional negative impacts, because when the government releases crime indicators and data, that can make citizens feel unsafe without understanding the full story. This is like when you see videos of crime on social media, such as robberies, without context. It can influence citizens' perceptions about a place and how safe they feel there.
Yeah, that's something interesting. Yeah, you would think that by communicating crime, it would be a good thing. And another problem is that the efficacy of the digital security tools isn't actually well measured.
Yes, and the critique coming from the local people is that the city is, again, not trying to address the cause of the problem, but rather the problem in its surface in the short term by increasing, for example, police forces. And the politicians are basically also using this in their campaigns, as you can imagine.
Yeah, exactly. Saying this wasn't specifically said in the report, but, it's like a logical conclusion, that's it's a good narrative, to emphasize security and stuff. So, we have a problem of crime that requires long-term investments and solutions. And then at the same time, now we have a surveillance problem, right? Because we have all these tools being developed, that don't solve the problem very well, that they're supposed to address. So it has negative side effects.
Indeed, it's harder to communicate and explain why long-term strategies working on the roots of the problem, such as poverty, is important. And the government apparently still struggles to tackle poverty issues and the reasons why people commit crime in the first place. Also, poverty shouldn't necessarily lead to crime.
Yeah, basically increasing the dialogue between governments and communities is one of the ways to talk about those issues. And this is what Edgelands has invested in.
Okay, so we've learned a lot about security in Medellin today, haven't we, Ben?
No, exactly. So we saw a lot of the context right now is really important because now there are many other questions that are really what we're going to discuss further in the next episode. So, for example, how can city leaders repair levels of trust and confidence on the part of citizens?
Or how can we involve youth in the learning of the issues and the search of solutions?
Yeah, and how can Medellin's youth communicate their own lived experience in the city? And how can they do it, for example, using arts? How would policymakers respond to this art as well?
We'll talk about these questions and more in the next episodes and explore how Edgelands has tackled them.
Yeah, so you can learn more about this report that is on our website at edgelands.institute. It has really in-depth research on the topic, so don't forget to also like and follow us if you haven't yet, and we will see you on the next one.